The farmhouse stood silhouetted against a darkening sky, clouds swelling like bruises, lightning stabbing the horizon in bursts of silent fury. Wind whipped dust across cracked fields, dried-out stalks shuddering under the storm's threatland that generations had fought to tame, now gasping its last breath beneath an indifferent sky. In the farmer's calloused hands trembled an envelope, the ink-red stamp stark against crisp white foreclosure notice. Thunder rumbled low, a bitter echo of dreams slipping away. But as the first fat drops of rain exploded in the dust, a faint blue glow flickered near the fence line, a pulse of strange hope, or perhaps another cruel trick played by fate. Either way, change was coming, and there was no turning back. Ethan Collins stood at the edge of the dry pasture he had farmed for nearly 4 decades, his weathered boots pressing into cracked soil. The late afternoon sun cast deep shadows across the land that had belonged to his family for 5 generations. In another era, the Collins family farm had flourished with abundant wheat fields, a modest orchard, and grazing meadows for dairy cows. But years of relentless drought had reduced the once fertile acreage to pale stubble. At 62, Ethan felt the weight of tradition on his shoulders. He could almost hear the voice of his late father, Ray Collins, reminding him that their legacy must endure. Yet, the bank notices were stacking up on his cluttered kitchen table, marked with bold red deadlines that threatened foreclosure. Even in his youth, Ethan had never been the type to ignore a problem, but this time he was at a loss for solutions. He had installed a new irrigation line a few seasons earlier, draining most of his savings just to watch the well levels drop even faster. The land demanded more water than nature was willing to give. His daughter, Grace Collins, who was away at college studying sustainable agriculture, kept urging him to consider advanced methods. "Dad, people are using drip systems, moisture sensors, even hydroponics," she'd say over the phone, her voice brimming with ideas. But Ethan resisted. He felt deep down that the family had always done things by hand, trusting in rain and sweat. To uproot that faith now felt like giving up on what his ancestors had built. Still, the signs were unavoidable. Late payments, stressed animals, and withered crops drew the attention of Midland Trust, the local bank that had financed Ethan's most recent loan. That very morning, he'd received yet another stark letter, warning that he had 6 weeks left to settle his arrears before they initiated repossession. Rumor had it that a private energy firm called Green Flow Energy was eager to buy up failing farmland along the valley to build a new hydro facility, watching the wind stir clouds of dust where there had once been green shoots. Ethan hated the thought that he might be forced to sell out to some corporation. He had sworn to his father on the man's deathbed that he would never let the Collins family farm slip away. That night, the skies finally churned with heavy clouds. Lightning flickered in the distance, hoping for rain. Ethan trudged out to the southern field in the fading light, scanning for any sign of moisture. As gusts whipped up loose soil, he caught a glimpse of something shiny in the dirt near the property's fence line, a flash of reflective material partially hidden behind a tuft of dry grass. Bending over, he discovered a sleek black backpack with unusual metallic trim. It didn't look like the sort of rugged gear hikers typically carried on the old nature trail abutting his land. Carefully, he unzipped a small pocket and felt an odd humming sensation against his palm, a kind of subtle vibration. Inside lay futuristic gadgets, a cylindrical object glowing faintly blue, a wafer-thin tablet sealed in a protective case, and a strange, palm-sized disc with pulsating lights. Before he could examine them further, thunder cracked overhead, and the first fat drops of rain splattered on the dusty ground. Little did Ethan know that this chance discovery was about to reshape not only his struggling farm, but also the entire direction of his life. Lightning flashed, illuminating the backpack in a sudden blaze of pale light. Ethan stepped back warily. Everything about these devices felt foreign, unlike anything he had encountered, even in magazines or television segments about modern tech. Rain now fell in earnest, rattling against the battered brim of his hat, securing the backpack's zipper. Ethan cradled it protectively and headed toward the farmhouse, his old yellow Labrador, Rusty, trotting at his side. Inside the kitchen, he set the strange bundle on a worn oak table that had served the Collins family for decades. Water dripped from his jacket as he hung it on a peg, ignoring the small puddle forming at his feet. It was then that he heard a vehicle outside, an electric hum rather than the familiar rumble of a combustion engine. He peered through the rain-streaked window to see sleek headlights pulling up his gravel drive, scattering raindrops in a wide arc. A moment later, someone knocked at his door. He opened it to find a drenched woman in a dark green jacket, her eyes scanning the dimly lit interior. She carried herself with a certain confidence, though she looked out of place in the rural darkness. "I'm sorry to bother you this late," she said, her voice raised over the roar of the rain. "I'm looking for a black backpack, very important equipment inside." Ethan examined her for a moment. She was perhaps in her mid-30s, with short, efficiently styled hair and a direct gaze that revealed both anxiety and determination. "You must be talking about this," he replied, gesturing toward the table. Relief flooded her expression. She introduced herself as Sienna Rowan, CEO of ArcLight Innovations based in Boston, a firm specializing in advanced agricultural technology. "I was conducting some environmental readings near the nature reserve," she explained. "It's an unauthorized route, I know, but we needed real-world data. Then the storm hit, and I slipped down an embankment. I couldn't find my pack in the dark." Ethan lifted the backpack, handing it to her carefully. "It's not every day I see something like this," he said, curiosity getting the better of him. "That glowing cylinder in there, what exactly is it?" Sienna hesitated, glancing at the battered cabinets and the ancient radio on the countertop. She exhaled, deciding to trust him. "It's an experimental atmospheric water generator," she began. "It extracts moisture from the air and condenses it into usable water. More efficient than anything on the market if it passes field tests." Ethan's eyes widened. Water from the air. That sounded like the stuff of science fiction. The timeliness of her invention struck him hard. Here he was, on the brink of losing everything due to drought, and some brilliant mind claimed to have a compact machine that could harness moisture from the atmosphere. He motioned for her to sit, offering a towel. "You can wait out the storm here if you like." Sienna nodded gratefully, setting the sodden backpack on a chair. As thunder shook the windows, she glanced around, taking in the old photographs of Ethan's father and grandfather on the walls. "This place has a history," she observed softly. Ethan nodded, an ache forming in his chest. "And I'm trying not to be the one to lose it." Over steaming mugs of black coffee, Ethan and Sienna talked well into the night. She explained that ArcLight Innovations had been developing precision agricultural systems, advanced irrigation setups, soil monitoring sensors, and prototypes like her atmospheric water generator. "We believe small family farms are the backbone of sustainable agriculture," Sienna said passionately, "but they're often the last to benefit from cutting-edge tools. Big corporations can afford to experiment, while smaller operations fall further behind." Ethan regarded her skeptically, stirring his coffee. He couldn't count how many times he had heard promises from banks or agricultural agencies about helping the little guy, only to watch hidden fees and unrealistic demands bury farmers. But something about Sienna's sincerity, the visible mud stains on her jacket, and the earnest tone of her voice made him pause. Clearly, she was hands-on rather than an executive barking orders from a high-rise office. She'd been out trudging around in the storm, collecting real-world data. "If your device works," he ventured, "it could mean the difference between life and death for farmland across this region." Sienna opened the damp backpack and gingerly retrieved the cylinder that softly glowed. "This is just one piece of what we're testing," she explained, her voice filling with a scientist's pride. "Think of it like a puzzle. One part helps generate water, another monitors the soil's moisture needs, and another portion automates how water is distributed. When all the pieces fit, farmers can survive drought conditions with much less strain on groundwater in wells." Setting the cylinder on the table, she rotated it gently. A faint humming rose, and a thin trickle of water condensed on a small outlet spout, collecting in a removable compartment. Ethan watched, rapt, as only a few drops appeared. Yet the mere demonstration was mesmerizing. "You must have a lot of faith in this," he murmured, Sienna glanced at the photographs of Ethan's ancestors again. Faith, yes, but also a sense of responsibility. My grandparents lost their farm to desertification in another country. My parents emigrated so we could start anew. I don't want that fate for others if there's something we can do about it. Just then, the farm's ancient generator flickered, causing the kitchen lights to dim momentarily. Rusty the Labrador huffed from his cozy spot under the table. Sienna smiled at the dog before turning back to Ethan. Look, I appreciate you keeping my backpack safe, she said, carefully packing away the equipment. Before I go, let me at least leave you a small version of that cylinder. It might provide 10 gallons a day, not enough to replace your main water source, but maybe enough to keep a garden patch alive. Ethan swallowed hard. Part of him wanted to spurn newfangled technology, yet the dryness of the land outside weighed on his conscience. If there was even a small chance it could help. All right, he conceded softly. I'll give it a try, but don't expect me to jump on any futuristic bandwagon. Sienna set the cylinder on the kitchen counter and scribbled her number on the back of a business card. Thank you, she said, zipping the rest of her gear. Call me anytime. Ethan nodded, seeing the genuine relief in her eyes as she stepped back into the storm. Little did he realize, that short exchange would spark the transformation of everything he believed about farming. The next few days brought only a drizzle or two, barely enough to settle the dust around Ethan's farmhouse. Determined to see if Sienna's device had any real merit, he set it up on a flat patch near his small vegetable garden, the last vestige of once thriving produce fields. Carefully following the instructions scrawled in her notebook, he plugged it into a generator-powered outlet, adjusted the intake settings, and waited. It whirred quietly, emitting a soft glow at dawn and again at dusk. Each evening, Ethan checked the water reservoir. To his amazement, the cylinder reliably gathered around 10 gallons, just enough to stop his tomatoes and peppers from shriveling in the scorching afternoon sun. Word of the peculiar contraption spread quickly, thanks to his occasional helpers and neighbors. One afternoon, his longtime friend and rancher, Wade Thompson, dropped by. Heard you got yourself a fancy doodad that makes water out of thin air. Wade teased, tipping his hat. Ethan, never fond of drawing attention, shrugged. Just trying something new, he said gruffly. But inside he was both hopeful and perplexed. If this small device worked consistently, what else might be possible? That same week, Ethan received a phone call from Grace. She was in the middle of finals, but had caught wind of her father's new science experiment. Dad, do you realize what you have there? Grace asked, excitement evident in her voice. Atmospheric water generation, if done efficiently, could revolutionize farming in arid regions. Ethan couldn't help but smile at his daughter's enthusiasm, yet he remained cautious. We'll see, Grace, he said. It's helping the garden, but we're a long way from saving the farm. Indeed. A new letter from Midland Trust arrived by courier, reminding him he had only 5 more weeks to make a substantial payment. They cited rumors of a prospective buyer, Greenflow Energy, itching to purchase the entire valley for a hydro project. The letter practically demanded Ethan vacate if he couldn't clear his debts by the deadline. Furious and desperate, he tried calling old contacts who might co-sign a loan, but no one wanted to risk money on a place stricken by drought and overshadowed by big corporate interest. On the 5th day, as Ethan fiddled with the water generator, an engine rumbled up his driveway. It wasn't Wade this time, but a sleek black SUV. Out stepped Sienna Rowan with a young man in tow, a lanky engineer named Leo Hernandez, armed with a tablet and a restless energy. Mr. Collins, Sienna said warmly, extending her hand. I was in the area reviewing our local field trials. Mind if we take a look at how our little machine is running? Ethan motioned for them to follow him to the garden. It's consistent. I'll give you that, he said. Keeps my tomatoes alive. Sienna checked the intake vents, smiling at the stable readings on her device. Afterward, the trio retreated to the shade of the barn. There, Sienna broached a delicate subject, Ethan. I know times are tough. We're looking for a farm to partner with on a full-scale pilot. We'd install our entire precision agriculture system, sensors and all, no charge. In return, we'd gather performance data and refine our technology. Ethan felt his stomach tense. He could almost picture his father glaring at him for entertaining the idea. Yet, as he glanced at the parched fields beyond the barn doors, he realized he might not have much choice if he wanted to stay afloat. They spread out blueprints and schematics on a makeshift table propped atop two hay bales. Leo spoke in rapid bursts, pointing to digital diagrams on his tablet. Here's the network of soil sensors we'd install. Each sensor reports moisture levels in real time to a central hub. Then, an automated drip system disperses exactly the amount of water needed, precisely where it's needed. No more, no less. He turned to a chart showing cost analysis. And with the advanced atmospheric generators, we can supplement irrigation if the well runs low. That should cut groundwater usage by at least 40%. Sienna gestured to a second set of diagrams, depicting a tall unit that resembled a small windmill. We also have solar-powered versions of the generator for remote fields, and we can integrate them with storage tanks. Ethan frowned, crossing his arms. And I suppose your fancy system will cost a fortune once you start selling it to farmers. She sighed. We're working on alternative financing options, some grants, some lease-to-own models. But that's the future. Right now, we need a live site for data validation. We'd cover hardware expenses, labor, and maintenance. You'd be free to keep the results after the pilot ends, with no hidden fees. Ethan glanced at the farmland visible through the barn doors. The fields looked heartbreakingly barren. A few crows hopped around scattered husks of last season's corn. In the distance, he could see the battered well pump he had replaced 3 times in 10 years. He inhaled deeply, recalling how his father used to teach him about reading the clouds for any hint of rain. Those days seemed so far away now. Could he betray that tradition by embracing these sophisticated gadgets? Yet memory after memory of financial stress flashed through his mind. The bank letters, the humiliating visits where he begged for extension after extension, the thought of losing everything to a mega corporation. Slowly, he unclenched his fists. It's not just my decision, he said gruffly. Grace, my daughter, wants to come back here eventually. She's studying new farming techniques. Sienna's expression brightened. All the better. We'll welcome her input. Ethan studied both Sienna and Leo. All right, but on 2 conditions. He said, first, I decide where you install what. You don't tear up any field or orchard without my say-so. Second, if I feel this is hurting the land, I pull the plug. Leo nodded immediately, but Sienna paused thoughtfully. Agreed, she said. We want this to work for you, not against you. They shook hands. The deal was sealed. Ethan felt a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, relief tinged with guilt, a spark of hope amid lingering doubt. When the pair drove off, he stood under the barn's eaves, gazing at the dusty horizon. He could almost hear his father's gravelly voice in the back of his mind, reminding him how the Collins family had always been stubborn, yet resourceful. I'm not turning my back on what you taught me, he whispered, as if speaking to a ghost. I'm just trying to keep our name alive. Within a week, ArcLight Innovations team arrived with trucks carrying spools of piping, crates of sensors, and scaffolding for solar panels. They were led by Leo, who buzzed around the property, marking locations on a digital map while a crew of half a dozen technicians followed. Ethan felt both amused and uneasy watching them weave between the fields, measuring, digging small pits, and installing devices he couldn't even name. This was a far cry from how he'd once helped his father maintain irrigation by walking the rows with a shovel, channeling water by intuition and experience. One afternoon, as they rolled out drip lines across the northern field, a power outage struck. The old transformer at the end of the lane had blown a fuse, an all too frequent occurrence in the rural grid. With no electricity, the pump system stalled, the fancy control hub shut down, and the workers milled around helplessly. Spotting a crisis, Ethan leaped into action. He remembered how his grandfather used to rig a gravity-fed watering system during blackouts. Rounding up leftover plastic sheeting, he fashioned a makeshift canal leading from a still full livestock trough down toward the most vulnerable seedlings. Then, with a shovel in hand, he spent the next 2 hours ensuring the water reached each section, using the slope of the land to guide the flow. Leo arrived on the scene breathless, sweat staining his collar. "We're trying to get a generator truck out here, but it's caught in traffic," he said. He paused, observing Ethan's impromptu solution, an old-school approach that was shockingly effective. "I guess there's a lot we can't replicate with technology," Leo admitted sheepishly. "Skill, instincts, local knowledge," Ethan corrected, leaning on his shovel. "You can't code those into your fancy system." When power returned late that evening, the team rebooted their equipment. Most of the seedlings had been saved, thanks to Ethan's quick thinking. Sienna, who arrived shortly after for a site inspection, found Leo unsettled. "I messed up," he confessed. "I relied too heavily on our automated system and had no backup plan for a power cut." Sienna gave him a reassuring pat on the back. "We're here to learn too. Next time, we incorporate a contingency for rural grid failures." She then sought out Ethan, who was hosing down his shovel near the barn. "I appreciate what you did," she said earnestly. "This partnership won't succeed if we don't respect the knowledge farmers already possess." Ethan shrugged off the compliment, his pride softened by fatigue. "My father always said it's not enough to know the land, you have to stay humble. The land can break you if you get cocky." Sienna nodded, impressed. She asked about Ethan's father, curious about the farm's history. Over cups of tea in the kitchen, Ethan opened up about Ray Collins, how he had grown up in the Great Plains Dust Bowl era, how he taught Ethan to read the wind patterns, and how to cherish every drop of water. Listening intently, Sienna realized that bridging traditional wisdom with next-generation technology was more complex and more crucial than any of her data models had suggested. Despite the progress in installing the new system, the farm's looming financial deadline weighed on Ethan like a lead weight. Each morning he checked the mailbox with a sense of dread. Sure enough, the next letter from Midland Trust arrived, stating that Greenflow Energy had formally submitted an offer to purchase the Collins family farm pending foreclosure if Ethan failed to settle his debt in 4 weeks. He slammed the screen door in frustration, startling Rusty, who had been dozing in the sun. How could he possibly raise the money in time, even with a miracle from Sienna's technology grace? Meanwhile, called with more urgency, "Dad, have you thought about contacting the local agriculture extension office? They might help you apply for emergency drought relief." Ethan rubbed his tired eyes. "I've tried, but Grace, the lines of credit are basically dry because this entire region is facing the same crisis. They can't bail everyone out." She suggested he speak directly with the county commissioner, but Ethan's pride flared. "I don't want to grovel for a handout, especially not when I'm already behind on everything else." Grace fell silent for a moment before quietly urging him to keep an open mind. Meanwhile, the ArcLight crew pressed forward. Large reels of sensor cables were buried around the orchard, while the newly installed solar panels glinted in the merciless sunlight. "Within a week, we'll be able to run these atmospheric generators at full capacity," Leo reported, scanning the data on his tablet. "From preliminary measurements, the humidity levels here are low, but we can still generate enough water to supplement your well." Ethan nodded, trying to remain stoic even as an ember of hope flickered within him. One scorching afternoon, a battered old pickup rumbled into the driveway. Out climbed a man in a crisp shirt and tie, Michael Hansen, a representative from Midland Trust, accompanied by 2 men in suits. They surveyed the half-dug trenches and solar rigs with thinly veiled disdain. "Mr. Collins," Hansen said, approaching Ethan, who was checking the orchard lines, "we understand you've aligned yourself with some outside party. I need to remind you that any major changes to the property must be reported to the bank if it affects your collateral value." Ethan's temper flared. "I'm trying to improve the land, make it productive again. Isn't that in your interest too?" Hansen looked over his documents, exchanging a smirk with his companions. "We simply want to ensure the property retains a certain sale value. In case, well, in case it comes to that, I'm here to give you formal notice. 4 weeks remain, Mr. Collins. After that, the farm is ours if you can't pay." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "We'll see." He spat, returning to his chores. Sienna and Leo watched the exchange from a distance, sensing the tension in every clipped syllable. Once Hansen left, Sienna approached Ethan. I might have a plan, she offered carefully. We can hold a field demonstration in 2 weeks to showcase the system to local farmers, extension officers, and potential private sponsors. If enough of them see the technology's promise, we could secure short-term funding or raise public pressure on the bank. It's a gamble, but it might help. Though wary, Ethan saw no other lifeline. Let's do it, he said, determined to protect his family's legacy at any cost. In the flurry leading up to the big demonstration, the Collins farm hummed with unprecedented activity. Sienna coordinated with her marketing team to invite local media, academic researchers, and county officials. Leo led the final phase of installations, double-checking that every sensor functioned correctly and that the atmospheric generators operated at full efficiency. Ethan spent hours each day helping direct cables, connecting pipes, or simply explaining the lay of the land to the new influx of strangers. Though it felt odd to see so many outsiders tramping around his property, he recognized the urgency behind their efforts. Despite the forward momentum, the stress took a toll. Sleep did not come easily as Ethan worried about the bank's ultimatum. Memories of his father's stories, how they'd nearly lost the farm once during the 1980s crisis, haunted him. Ray Collins had scraped through by cutting back on every expense and bartering with neighbors. But times had changed, and the drought now was punishing. At moments, Ethan wondered if he was chasing a false promise, letting these tech experts turn his beloved fields into a laboratory. A few days before the demonstration, Grace returned home. A tall, lean young woman of 21, she had the gentle eyes and determined jaw of her late grandmother. Stepping onto the porch, she surveyed the transformed landscape rows of gleaming panels, small towers funneling vapor from the air, and a maze of drip lines. "Dad," she breathed, dropping her suitcase. "This is incredible." Ethan, arms crossed, nodded with a subdued pride. "We're not saved yet, but it's the best chance we've had in a long while." That evening, father and daughter walked the property together. Grace marveled at the real-time data streaming on the small control monitors inside the barn. "You know, Dad, this is exactly what we're studying in my advanced course of precision agriculture. Micro-irrigation. I never thought I'd see it here so soon." On the eve of the demonstration, the team performed a full system test. Sienna, wearing mud-splattered boots rather than her usual polished shoes, inspected each station with a flashlight. Leo input commands on his tablet to release measured bursts of water into test plots. Overhead, the main atmospheric generator reared steadily, condensing vapor into a large holding tank. The orchard, once on the brink of collapse, now showed signs of modest recovery, leaves greener, blossoms on a few surviving branches. Late that night, Ethan decided to check on the orchard alone. With a lantern in hand, he walked the rows where his father had taught him to prune and graft trees decades earlier. Pausing under a sturdy old apple tree, he ran his calloused palm over the trunk, recalling how Ray Collins used to say the orchard was the heart of this farm. If the orchard thrived, so did the family. Reflecting on that heritage, Ethan felt a surge of guilt for having sold a small creekside plot of land earlier that month to cover the cost of seeds and feed. That plot had sentimental value. He and his father used to fish there, but he needed the money and sacrifices had to be made. "I hope it's worth it," he murmured. Above him, the leaves rustled in a soft night breeze, offering neither judgment nor comfort. Demonstration day dawned with an early morning haze that glowed gold in the rising sun. Trucks, vans, and cars lined the dirt road leading up to the Collins family farm, carrying curious onlookers from miles around. County agriculture officials arrived first, shaking Ethan's hand politely while eyeing the shiny new hardware peppering the fields. Local news crews set up tripods, capturing footage of the orchard and the rows of recently planted cover crops. Even a couple of potential investors from out of state strolled around, guided by ArcLight staff who rattled off statistics on water savings and yield improvements. Sienna, dressed in sturdy denim and a crisp-collared shirt, radiated a calm but focused energy. She greeted guests near a makeshift welcome station in front of the barn. Large posters displayed high-level facts about drought impacts and the potential of atmospheric water generation. Nearby, Grace stood by a table piled with fresh produce from the rejuvenated vegetable patch, vibrant tomatoes, crisp lettuce, and a basket of fragrant herbs, all grown with a fraction of the usual water. Mid-morning, Sienna called everyone to gather near the control center, now outfitted with display screens and charts. She introduced Ethan as our farm partner who dared to try something new, then launched into a presentation about ArcLight Innovation's mission, bridging advanced technology and small-scale agriculture. Her voice carried conviction as she explained how the sensors map soil moisture in real time, how the drip lines are activated only when and where needed, and how the atmospheric generators produce supplemental water even in low humidity environments. In the past, technology like this was reserved for mega corporations, she said, glancing over the crowd. We believe it must be accessible to family farms if we're going to ensure food security in uncertain climates. Next, Leo took the stage, so to speak, fiddling with his tablet to display live data feeds. He showed how the orchard's soil moisture had steadily risen from critically low levels to a stable zone. He toggled to the vegetable patch's feed, highlighting how each plant row received just enough water, down to a fraction of a gallon. We're seeing a 60% reduction in overall water usage compared to conventional methods, he announced. Yet the yield, at least for these vegetables, is on track to match previous good years, perhaps even exceed them. Ethan watched from the side, arms folded, heart pounding with a strange mix of pride and apprehension. If everything went smoothly, perhaps some of these visitors might help champion the farm's cause. Maybe the bank would grant him an extension if public support grew, but if the demonstration flopped or came across as fanciful science fiction, it would likely signal the end of the road. As the demonstration moved outdoors, local farmers asked tough questions, from the cost of installing new lines to the lifespan of the generators. A few men in worn caps scoffed at overly complicated contraptions, while others peppered Sienna and Leo with queries about maintenance and reliability. Grace led smaller groups to see the orchard in the newly planted test plots, showing them how the system adjusted water flow automatically when a sensor reported dryness. This is not about replacing farmers, she emphasized, but empowering them with tools they can control and customize. Ethan listened proudly, realizing how much Grace had grown into a knowledgeable, confident advocate for sustainable agriculture. By midday, the demonstration was winding down, and Sienna gathered the crowd for closing remarks. The question hung in the air. Would it be enough to secure the farm's future? Just when it seemed the day had concluded on a hopeful note, a sleek black sedan crawled up the driveway, churning dust behind its tires. Out stepped Michael Hansen from Midland Trust, this time accompanied by a representative from Greenflow Energy, a tall man in an impeccably pressed suit who introduced himself as Marcus Lane. Their sudden appearance cast a tense pall over the gathered crowd. Hansen offered a thin smile. Quite the event you've got here, Mr. Collins. Before Ethan could reply, Lane chimed in, scanning the advanced equipment with mild amusement. I see you've invested in some new toys. Interesting approach. His gaze roamed over the orchard and the lines of sensors stretching across the parched fields. However, we're here to finalize an offer that might be in your best interest. Lane continued, pulling out a file. Greenflow Energy is prepared to pay above market value for your property, enough to settle your debt with Midland Trust and leave you with some capital to relocate. Ethan bristled. This is my home. My father. My grandfather. They poured their lives into this land. I'm not interested in selling. Lane's expression remained placid, his voice silky. I understand tradition. But look around. Is your sentimental attachment worth risking financial ruin? We're offering a sure thing. Sienna stepped forward, a spark of defiance in her eyes. Mr. Collins is collaborating with ArcLight Innovations for a sustainable solution. The farm is on a path to recovery, if given time. Lane waved her off dismissively. Yes, I see your demonstration. Impressive stage show. But technology can fail, and the drought won't end just because you installed a few fancy machines. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers, many of whom recognized the real threat underlying Lane's words. Hansen, clearing his throat, handed Ethan a crisp envelope. You have 2 weeks left, per our prior agreement. After that, the bank will proceed with foreclosure if your debt remains unpaid. Greenflow has made a generous offer that expires at that time. Ethan glared at the men in suits, feeling his pulse hammer in his veins. He glanced at Grace, who looked on in dismay. Then an unexpected voice rang out. I think we've seen enough here to know it's not just a fancy show. The speaker was a local orchard owner named Harriet Mitchell, known in the region for her no-nonsense attitude. She turned to the crowd. This system is delivering water precisely. My nephew's got a small orchard in worse shape than the Collins place, and I want to see if this can help him too. Several other farmers nodded their agreement, emboldened by Harriet's stance. Lane's confident smirk faltered. A county official stepped up, announcing that the demonstration results merited discussion at the next council meeting. We'd like to hear from Ms. Rowan and Mr. Collins, he said, jotting notes. If even half of these data points are accurate, this could be a game changer for our region. Lane's eyes narrowed, but Hanson swiftly escorted him away, promising that Midland Trust's position remained the same. As they drove off, the tension settled into a kind of resolute hope among the crowd. People trickled away, many shaking Ethan's hand or exchanging phone numbers with Sienna to discuss potential collaborations. Ethan exhaled deeply, eyes flicking to Grace and Sienna. The battle wasn't won, but it felt like the tide was turning. Maybe, just maybe, they had a shot at stopping that foreclosure. In the days that followed, Ethan's farm turned into something of a local curiosity. Not only were farmers dropping by unannounced, but extension officers, environmental science students, and even curious residents from the nearby towns wanted a closer look at the atmospheric water generators and the digital monitors in the Bearturn Control Center. Ethan felt like a reluctant tour guide, leading small groups between the rows of orchard trees that were slowly reviving. Tensions still simmered just beneath the surface. Every time Ethan checked his mailbox, he half expected to see a final notice stamped with a foreclosure date. Instead, he received more queries from prospective supporters. One envelope arrived from an agricultural nonprofit, expressing interest in funding a study on how well the ArcLight system performed under real-world conditions. Another letter, from a local hardware chain, offered a small sponsorship if Ethan agreed to do a promotional piece about modernizing farms. Sienna advised caution. We don't want to appear like a commercial, she said, but if it means bridging that financial gap, we can explore it. Meanwhile, Grace took on a larger role managing the orchard's day-to-day operations, using the sensor data to fine-tune watering schedules. In the mornings, she walked the orchard with a tablet in hand, checking for pests or signs of disease. In the evenings, she pored over soil reports with Sienna and Leo, comparing them against historical rainfall patterns. The synergy between her academic knowledge and the expert's technology was apparent. Dad, we can try planting a new drought-resistant apple variety next season, she suggested one night over dinner. It's bred to thrive in low-water conditions, and we can test it with minimal risk thanks to these systems. Ethan nodded thoughtfully, slicing into a tomato from the revitalized garden. It tasted sweeter than any tomato he remembered in recent years, perhaps because it was a taste of hope. Even so, the clock was ticking, 2 weeks until Midland Trust's deadline. While the orchard was on the mend, Ethan needed to show tangible financial prospects if he wanted an extension or if he planned to attract any investors. Amid the bustle of visitors, conflict arose in the form of local skepticism. A few older farmers accused Ethan of getting in bed with corporate interests, warning that technology had driven small farms out of business before. One neighbor insisted that the water generator was stealing water from the air, that his crops would otherwise benefit, from a misunderstanding that sparked heated debates at the local feed store. Ethan tried to quell these fears, but it underscored how precarious the acceptance of new methods could be in a traditional community. One afternoon, Harriet Mitchell invited Ethan to speak at the next county agricultural meeting. She believed if the council heard directly from him and Sienna, they might pressure Midland Trust to grant more time or even secure a subsidy. People listened to real stories. Harriet advised, not just data. Tell them what this means to you, your family, and our entire region. Ethan dreaded public speaking almost as much as he dreaded losing the farm. But Harriet was right. If he wanted to keep the Collins name on this land, he'd have to fight for it both in the fields and in the halls of local government. On a sweltering Wednesday evening, the county agricultural meeting convened at the old VFW hall. The space was packed farmers, local officials, a few bankers, and more than a handful of curious citizens who'd heard about the miracle at the Collins place. Seated at a long table facing the crowd, Ethan wiped beads of sweat from his brow while Harriet Mitchell introduced him. Sienna sat beside him, laptop at the ready. Grace stood in the back, supporting her father with an encouraging nod. Ethan began, voice trembling at first, recounting how his great-grandfather had purchased the original 50 acres with borrowed money and a dream. He described the orchard's heyday and how Ray Collins had taught him that respect for the land was a farmer's greatest virtue. Clearing his throat, Ethan then recounted the endless droughts, the frustration with failing irrigation systems, and the mounting debt that threatened to tear the farm from his family's grip. "I'm not a man who embraces technology lightly," he admitted, locking eyes with some older farmers in the audience. "But desperate times call for open minds." Sienna took over seamlessly, showing slides of the orchard's revival before and after photos depicting drooping branches turned vibrant green. Charts displayed water usage dropping drastically while crop health indices climbed. She explained how ArcLight Innovations intended to develop affordable financing models so farmers wouldn't be buried under massive upfront costs. "We're talking about grants, cooperative purchasing, sliding scale fees," she said, emphasizing inclusivity. The crowd murmured in cautious approval. Then came questions, rapid, probing, and occasionally skeptical. A robust cattle rancher asked about system resilience during storms. A local orchard owner demanded clarity on maintenance fees. Someone inquired about the risk of contamination or mechanical failure. Sienna and Leo, who had joined at the table, provided thoughtful answers, citing test results and vendor partnerships. It was as if the entire community had awakened to the possibility that technology could be a friend rather than a foe. Halfway through the session, a stern voice interrupted from the back, Michael Hansen from Midland Trust, accompanied by Marcus Lane of Greenflow Energy. "All this is very enlightening," Hansen said, "but none of it changes the terms of the loan. Mr. Collins still owes an outstanding sum. Unless the county wants to foot the bill, we can't prolong the inevitable." Lane added with a thin smile, "We remain willing to purchase the farm at a premium. That's money in Mr. Collins's pocket, ready today." A hush fell. Then Harriet stood. "The orchard is bouncing back, and I've seen his vegetables. They're the healthiest I've tasted in years." He's not asking for charity. He's proving the viability of a new system. Another council member suggested forming a special subcommittee to evaluate how to assist local farms adopting similar technology. The ensuing vote was close, but the majority agreed to open a feasibility study within the next 2 weeks, ironically the same time frame as Ethan's foreclosure deadline. Hansen shrugged, indicating the bank wouldn't budge. But the public outcry, especially from local media present, put him on the defensive. As the meeting adjourned, Ethan felt torn. He'd gained community support, yet no immediate financial reprieve had materialized. Time was running out, and the final showdown with Midland Trust loomed on the horizon. With only 10 days left before Midland Trust's cutoff, the Collins family farm underwent a final push. Grace meticulously documented every bit of data from the orchard yield estimations, water usage, soil nutrients. Sienna coordinated with her marketing team to compile a streamlined report to present to potential angel investors and philanthropic funds. Leo, determined to leave no stone unturned, scheduled a live-stream demonstration on social media, hoping the broader internet might rally behind Ethan's plight or at least shine enough light to influence the bank's decision. Meanwhile, Ethan made one of the hardest decisions of his life. He agreed to sell a small but cherished parcel of creekside land to a neighboring farm. It was a place filled with memories of fishing trips and picnics with his father. The transaction hurt him deeply, but it brought in just enough cash to cover immediate expenses, including feed for the livestock and the next wave of orchard maintenance. More than the financial relief, The sale symbolized the lengths he was willing to go to keep the core of the farm intact. During this whirlwind, Grace found Ethan sitting alone by the edge of the field one evening, watching the sun sink into a haze of red and orange. "Dad," she said gently, "you did what you had to do. We can't save everything." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "Ray Collins used to tell me there's no shame in sacrifice for the greater good. But I wish he were here now, telling me I'm making the right choices." Grace rested a hand on his shoulder. "I think he'd be proud of how hard you're fighting." ArcLight's main atmospheric generator now churned at near full capacity, producing a steady flow of water that, combined with precision drip lines, nourished newly planted cover crops. As the orchard stabilized, they even tested a small plot of spinach and peppers as a second wave of produce. Day by day, the once barren soil gained vitality. Local produce stands began asking if they could showcase Collins Farm tech-grown vegetables, a glimmer of commercial potential that could bolster Ethan's revenue. All this progress felt like a race against time. On day 7, Sienna pulled Ethan aside with an urgent phone call. A minor philanthropic group in Boston expressed interest in bridging the remainder of his debt, but only if they received verification of the farm's short-term profitability. They were essentially corporate sponsors looking for a success story. "We'd be turning the farm into a case study," Sienna explained apologetically. "We'd have to let them film everything, do interviews whenever they want. It's not ideal, but it might buy you more time." Ethan hesitated, remembering how protective his father had been of privacy and independence. Yet, the specter of losing the entire farm overshadowed those concerns. "If it's that or letting green flow energy turn this place into a reservoir," he muttered, "then I guess I'll let them roll the cameras." Sienna exhaled, looking both relieved and conflicted. Leo hammered out the details over the next 2 days, emailing the philanthropic group's representatives. The final word came back. They were willing to pay off half of Ethan's debt immediately if the orchard harvest showed tangible profit potential. With just 5 days left, the orchard's produce might be their last hope. Harvest came early to the Collins orchard that year, accelerated in part by the precisely timed irrigation and a run of warm days followed by cool nights. Despite the orchard's partial recovery, it wasn't as bountiful as in its prime. Still, baskets of apples, pears, and late-season peaches glowed in vibrant colors, far healthier than Ethan had dared to hope 2 months ago. With Grace's help, he arranged a small on-site harvest festival, an open invitation to local families, the press, and the philanthropic group's camera crew. Under a canopy of leftover orchard branches, tables were set with freshly picked fruit. The philanthropic group's representatives arrived, accompanied by a videographer who filmed the orchard from multiple angles. Children ran between the rows, marveling at the insect-friendly habitats. ArcLight's system supported bee boxes and carefully planted flowers that enhanced pollination. Sienna and Leo demonstrated the real-time sensor readouts on a monitor near the barn, while passers-by tasted the sweet, crisp apples that had been watered by atmospheric condensers. In the late afternoon, as the sun dipped, the philanthropic representative, an earnest woman named Dr. Eliza Monroe, sampled the fruit and walked the orchard with Ethan. "This is remarkable," she said, biting into an apple. 2 months ago, these trees were borderline dead, but now they're producing better than many commercial growers under severe drought conditions." Ethan nodded. "I still can't believe it sometimes. Part of me expects everything to shrivel up again. But this system," he paused, glancing at Sienna in the distance, "it's done wonders." Dr. Monroe explained that her organization was willing to provide an immediate infusion of funds, but they needed reassurance of long-term viability. "It's not just about one harvest," she emphasized. "It's about proving a model that can be replicated elsewhere. Are you committed to continuing these methods?" Ethan glanced around at the orchard, the lines of sensors, the humming water generators. In that moment, he felt an uncanny sense of belonging, a realization that his father's teachings about respecting the land didn't necessarily conflict with harnessing new tools. "I am," he said firmly, "and if this orchard can survive, I'd like to show other farmers they can, too." That evening, When the festival ended and the camera crew departed, Dr. Monroe approached Ethan with a signed commitment letter. It wouldn't pay off all of his debt, but it was enough to keep Midland Trust at bay, especially if he could sell the harvest for a decent margin. Feeling an immense weight lift from his shoulders, Ethan watched Grace dance excitedly with some neighbors to a fiddle tune. Sienna approached with a rare grin. "You did it," she said. "We're not across the finish line yet, but you've got breathing room." Ethan looked toward the horizon, where the orchard and fields extended under a lavender sky. A single star glinted overhead, and in his mind, he pictured his father's reassuring nod. "My thanks to you and Leo, too," he said, voice thick with emotion. "A few months ago, I was sure I'd have to sign it all away. Now there's a chance for something better." Sienna placed a hand on his arm. "Here's to forging tradition and technology into one future." 2 weeks later, the orchard's produce sold briskly at local markets and some specialty stores in nearby towns, generating enough income along with the philanthropic infusion to convince Midland Trust to extend Ethan's loan. Michael Hansen, clearly unimpressed, had no choice but to accept a check that left the bank with little leverage to seize the farm. Marcus Lane from Greenflow Energy withdrew his buyout offer, muttering something about lost opportunities and short-sightedness. But no one paid him much mind. The Collins family farm was safe for now. Word of the farm's transformation spread beyond the county lines. A journalist from a major newspaper arrived to interview Ethan about his experience merging old-school grit with advanced tech. Soon, offers came in from agricultural colleges to send interns, from environmental groups wanting to monitor the orchard's biodiversity, and from local high schools hoping to arrange field trips. The farm's battered barns and aged orchard had become a symbol of resilience, proof that with the right mix of innovation and tradition, family agriculture could adapt to the challenges of climate change. As the calendar turned to a new season, Ethan found himself splitting time between daily chores, pruning trees, checking livestock, and fielding inquiries from other farmers. Sienna proposed establishing a small demonstration hub at the Collins place where neighboring farms could receive hands-on training with arc light systems. Leo suggested they host weekend workshops, showing how to set up drip lines, manage sensor data, and operate smaller versions of the atmospheric generators. Intrigued, Ethan agreed, but only if Grace would co-lead the sessions. Grace, flattered and eager, threw herself into the project. She tapped her academic connections, inviting professors and grad students to help refine the curriculum. On a crisp Saturday morning, they held their first workshop. A dozen local farmers, some in their 60s, some just starting out, gathered around the orchard. As Leo demonstrated the control interface on his tablet, Grace explained how to read soil moisture graphs and calibrate irrigation times. Ethan, wearing his old straw hat, supplemented their technical talk with practical anecdotes. Sometimes the data will say one thing, but your gut will say another. Don't ignore either one. Find the balance. At day's end, a stooped elderly farmer approached Ethan, tears welling in his weathered eyes. "My family's on the verge of giving up our land, too," he said. "Seeing this place turned around gives me hope." Ethan patted the man's shoulder, recalling his own darkest hours. "You're welcome any time," he said simply. "We'll show you what we've learned." When the crowd dispersed, Ethan and Grace stood on a gentle rise overlooking the orchard. The late afternoon sun gilded the fields, where rows of fresh cover crops swayed in a light breeze. Rusty, the faithful Labrador, waddled through the grass, nose twitching at the scent of new life. "Dad," Grace murmured, leaning her head on Ethan's shoulder. "Do you think Grandpa Ray would be proud?" Ethan's eyes misted as he pictured his father's strong arms, a patient smile, always ready with some homespun wisdom. "He always said we had to change with the times or be left behind. It just took me a while to accept that." He gently squeezed Grace's hand. "Now I see it's not betrayal, it's survival. And not just survival, it's the chance to grow, to flourish." In the distance, Sienna and Leo packed up their gear by the barn, waving goodbye. The orchard's branches rustled with vibrant leaves, a testament to rebirth. As the sun dipped below the horizon in a blaze of orange, father and daughter lingered on that hill, breathing in the promise of a future they had fought for with grit, sacrifice, and a leap of faith together. In the end, the land always tells the truth. It whispers it through rustling leaves, murmurs it from the soil beneath worn boots, and carries it gently on every breath of wind. This farm had survived through sacrifice, stubbornness, and finally through surrendering old ways for new possibilities. It cost a creekside memory in moments of pride, trading familiarity for uncertainty. But what was gained was far greater: the chance to continue, to evolve, to protect a legacy forged through generations. Perhaps the greatest harvest wasn't the fruit from revived trees, nor the shimmering hope distilled from thin air. It was wisdom learned the hard way, through struggle and humility. It was realizing that strength lies not only in standing your ground, but in daring to change, to adapt, to see tradition not as a chain but as deep roots that allow new branches to reach higher. Tonight, beneath the endless stars stretching wide over this land, one question remains. When faced with losing everything you cherish, how far would you go, and what part of yourself might you discover along the way?